Hey everybody, it's Lindsay. Welcome to week 2. Today we are going to be talking about the study of sexuality. This is going to talk a little bit about research, but much more so about what are the things that influence our research and our education around sex. And so one of the biggest things that we're going to look at is media use. We've looked at media use over time. There's a chart in the slides that I'm going to refer you to that says, let's look at how we use media over time. We know that it's ever increasing. Now, this is a little bit of an older survey, and so it's out of date, but they haven't redone the study, so I still use this one because it still shows the trends in media usage. We know that particularly for youth, so ages 8 to 18, media consumption is powerful, right? And so we see the amount of media that kids see every day, whether it's passively, so just kind of TV in the background, commercials, etc., or whether it's active, they're being engaged through books or movies or other sort of things, sends a pretty large message. We see teens and youth consuming at least 8 hours of media a day, if not more. That's a pretty powerful sort of place to get a lot of information. And so we should probably look at what kind of information they're getting, particularly around sex and sexuality. Media is one of our largest sources of information outside of our nuclear family, right? So the family of origin, your parents, your grandparents, whoever you live with, often give you the biggest messages about sort of sexuality and what it means to be sort of a person and a human in this world. But secondarily to that, media is the thing that gives us a lot of information. Sometimes media is really helpful. It helps bring up discussions in public spaces that we normally wouldn't, right? Most people don't have sex educators as parents, and so those kind of topics don't really come up at the dinner table or those sort of things. Some specific examples of that might be sort of ideas around sexuality, like the Me Too movement, right? So talking about sexual harassment, sexual assault, talking about sexual violence is not something that most families want to talk about at the dinner table, right? But the media has pushed that through social media, through sort of mainstream media. We now know what the Me Too movement is about, or at least have some sort of idea. That it has been a role of the media pushing sort of that narrative to say, hey, we got to talk about this really tough sort of things. Transgender identities. When I was growing up, yes, there were transgender people, but it was not something that anybody ever talked about. It wasn't until the 2000s when we started to see people like Caitlyn Jenner come out and other sort of things, and media saying, hey, people that are trans exist. Non-binary identities, that's a thing. And most people and most families would have no reason to talk about trans people unless that happened to be part of their family story. And so media narratives have pushed this idea to say, hey, let's be aware of these sort of things and look at other sort of stuff. Thinking about condom usage and STI protection. Again, most things that families don't want to talk about over, a bowl of cereal in the morning. And yet the media says, hey, this is something we got to talk about. We got to talk about unplanned pregnancy. We got to talk about STIs, all these other sort of things. And so media oftentimes helps us to do that as a little sort of crutch along the way. However, we know that media only represents a small slice and a one, usually, viewpoint. Sometimes there are some times where media can present more than one viewpoint. For the most part, media sort of representations of things are pretty skewed, right? And so this becomes abundantly clear when it comes to body image and other sort of ideas around what bodies should look like, which bodies are valued, and those sort of things. And so I have 2 videos for you to watch there, thinking about these bigger pictures of how does media distort our sort of perceptions of reality. Other things that media can distort, the college experience, right? We have this idea of what college is supposed to be like, but is that actually true? How much are we playing into that narrative of what college should be like versus what college is? A lot of it is just studying and boring sort of stuff and going to classes. We're not all going to parties all the time and doing all sorts of living in sorority houses that are, look like mansions or other sort of things, but that's a narrative that the media pushes. We have a lot of fuzzy ideas about consent, right? In most sort of media, people will kind of look at each other across the room, and then they look at each other across the room, and then they'd room, and then everybody's clothes fall off, and then they just have sex, right? That's usually not how it works, right? It's way more awkward, and people are trying to stumble around and figure out sort of like, is this what we're gonna do? Da 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 da. And so we have these weird ideas about consent based on sort of media perceptions. When we think about the role of media in our lives, we have to be able to balance the positive aspects, consciousness raising, thinking about things that would be hard to talk about without the media's guidance, but also the negative aspects, so skewed perspectives, things that are not real or not true, and how do we encourage people to see broader than what is only being presented in media, especially young people. Those young people who are watching 8 hours of media a day, they need to know the difference between reality and what is sort of a projected image. And so those are really important sort of things to talk about. So rather than eliminating media from our lives, I love media, social media particularly, we need to think about how we use social media in smarter and better sort of ways. How do we get media to work for us? And how do we make sure that we are being critical consumers of the media that is being presented to us? Okay. The second aspect of this week that we're going to talk about is culture, right? So for a lot of us, culture is some sort of thing we think about in terms of anthropology and other ideas. But to be honest, culture is a lot of different sort of things. We all have multiple cultures, whether that culture be we are California students, professors, people, whether we are people from a white culture, whether we're people from an American culture, whether we're people from a queer culture, all of those different sort of things impact and influence the way that we see sexuality. So a lot of those sort of things have a big impact on how we start to navigate the world. So from there, I also want to talk about another culture, rape culture. So you probably have heard this. It used to be a term that many people hadn't heard, but in the past few years, most people have heard this term now, right? So for this class, the rape culture definition that we're going to use is that rape culture is an environment in which rape is prevalent, in which sexual violence is normalized and excused in media and popular culture. Rape culture is perpetuated through the use of misogynistic language, the objectification of people's bodies, and the glamorization of sexual violence, thereby creating a society which disregards the rights and safety of victims. Okay. Notice gender is not listed in there because anybody can be harmed by rape culture. We also know that people experience it in different sort of ways. But the idea being that rape culture is all around us and it's so pervasive, we don't even recognize it's there, right? And so the next couple slides in the lecture slides are different pictures of different sort of things that I've collected and curated from the web over time. The first one being a t-shirt. This t-shirt came up and was a big source of controversy. That it was even something that was printed. The guy who owned this store said, oh, that was never actually a t-shirt. It was just an algorithm that kind of paired together different words, and nobody actually ordered it, and I never actually sold any of them. But it still begs the question, why was rape a lot a question or a phrase that was put into an algorithm, right? The next one is some pictures from college campuses across the country. None of these are from Chico State, thank goodness. But these ideas that women are there to be used for pleasure, and that women belong to first their daddy and then to somebody else. This idea that women are just an object that is to be used. The next one are some pictures from our local Spencer's at the mall that I took, talking again about using that degrading language towards women and using them as sex object and as nothing else. And then this last picture is actually a picture from Chico State. This daughter drop-off sign happened at Chico State, and I had a very long discussion with the people who lived at that house to talk about why this wasn't okay. It's not funny. I know it was meant as just a humorous prank, but actually it's a really degrading sort of thing. College women are here to learn and to be educated. They're not here to be used as your sex toys at a college campus, okay? Next, I want to talk about language and variation, because from here on out, we're going to talk a lot about differences in a lot of different sort of things. In society, we often try to look at sex as natural or unnatural, or normal or abnormal, healthy or unhealthy. We like to do a lot of black and white sort of stuff. But in this class, our goal is to say, let's not judge people's behavior. Let's not look at these sort of things as good or bad. Instead, we want to just look at what is the diversity there. We can talk later in the semester about what are things that hurt people intentionally or unintentionally, and how does that have an impact. But for the most part, we're going to be looking at varied and diverse sexual behaviors. Who gets to decide what is right and wrong and healthy and unhealthy for people? So instead, in this class, we're going to use the words typical versus atypical. Typical is a statistical measure, meaning most people do this. Atypical is a statistical measure that says most people don't do this, right? And so when we look at sort of percentages of things, most people are straight, right? We think about 85 to 90% of the population is straight. That means 10 to 15% of the population is part of the LGBTQ spectrum. Does that mean one is better or worse? No, it's just different. And so we could say, the typical sexual orientation is straight, and atypical orientation is gay. Doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different. And we're talking about it from a statistical sort of norm. And that will be something that we'll use throughout the rest of the semester. Okay. Finally, when we're thinking about sort of human sexuality, we know that sex research covers a gamut of things. In this class, we're going to be talking mostly about sexuality, how it affects the individual, and sometimes how it affects people's sort of behaviors, particularly as it affects around health. Sexuality is often hard to study because it's taboo and it's seen as a private sort of thing. However, we know that sex is used in anywhere and everything, right? Have you ever heard the term sex sells? Yeah, well, if it's everywhere, then we should probably know how we feel about it and how it's affecting us in this world. And so we shouldn't see it as less value. It's not inherently a bad thing or a weird thing to be able to talk about. We need to talk about these sort of things because it's a very imperative part of our life. When we think about research and education, those two things are integrated together to create sort of what we know about the sexual world and things that are affected by it and how it affects things around us. And so we need to think about both formal education, so sitting in a classroom or sitting online listening to me, versus informal education, which is looking at web articles, stuff on social media, looking at research. So is it done in a lab? Is it done by scientists who are thinking about these sort of biased things? Or is it informal, right? Like you ask all your friends, hey, in bed, do you like to do these things? That's informal kind of research. Understanding that these two things go hand in hand is really important because they have an impact on our life. And we just need to be aware of sort of current trends and how things are going, because that is what is going to help us to be better sort of sexual healthy beings in this world. Okay, so thinking again about sort of rape culture, why do I bring that up? Why is that important? Well, we're going to have you watch a video about sexual objectification. Sexual objectification takes these pieces of media and culture and all these big things that I've been talking about and then filters it through this lens of sex research and education. Why does this matter? How is it affecting us? And what are sort of the outcomes? And so there's a video that you're going to watch about sexual objectification to try and tie all of this sort of stuff together. Okay, I want you to look at this sort of big picture stuff through the lens of culture and media, and that is going to set the stage for how we start to talk about the rest of the semester. Everything that we think that we know about sex, everything that we believe or feel about sex has been filtered through these lenses, and so we need to know what those lenses are and how they affect us, right? In order to change beliefs, behaviors, norms, trends, those sort of things, we've got to be able to identify them so that we can create sort of a better world where we're all feeling good about our lives and ourselves. Okay. So for this week, I want you to complete the activity that is listed on Blackboard by Friday. Next week, we'll be tackling chapters 3 and 4, which is sex, anatomy, body, physiology sort of stuff. And then I'm going to have you read the sex exploration paper instructions on Blackboard and watch the video next week that I will post. Okay. All right. See you later.